Yokai is a term used to describe supernatural entities and spirits from Japanese folklore. And in the world of Dandadan, there are few yokai that can match the overwhelming power of the Turbo Granny. But in her introduction to the story, we don't get too much information on her, aside from the fact that, she steals a pee-pee. So who is the Turbo Granny, and what is her story?
I'll let you suckle my teats, boy. If you let me gobble your dung.
The Turbo Granny, or Turbo Baba if you're one of those people, is a primary antagonist of Dandadan's first arc, before becoming a supporting character, and she's kind of the whole reason we're sitting at 170 plus chapters. With the first arc of the anime concluding, and a lot of people only now figuring out that Turbo Granny is actually real. I mean, the urban legend's real, not that she's actually real, because that would be ridiculous, right? Let's just focus on the history of the Turbo Granny.
You first, Okarun.
No, ladies first, I insist.
Then what if I start crying?
You're such a faker. We both go, fair and square.
The urban legend of the Turbo Granny comes to us from the highways and tunnels around Mount Rocco in the Hyogo prefecture. But soon after the first reports of the Turbo Granny, there were sightings of her all over Japan. In most stories, the victim would be driving on a highway late at night, when suddenly they'd see out of the corner of their eye an old lady running behind the car. The driver would only catch a glimpse of her before she'd dash away, leaving the drivers confused at what they'd just seen. But in other reports, she'd also knock on the window to try and distract the driver and cause a crash. But it said this would only happen to those driving over the speed limits. This version of the story is obviously a cautionary tale. But remember, the next time you're going 3 kilometers over the speed limit, she's coming for you and your schlong, so be afraid. Unless you're a woman, which then you're probably just gonna crash. So, maybe actually do worry. But that's just how the real story goes. Dandadan's version of the Turbo Granny is a bit different. And thanks to some extras from Volume 1 of the manga, we actually have an alternate take on her origins. The myth of the abandoned women and the Turbo Granny. And to quote the story directly, there is a theory of the Turbo Granny's origin story, originated from the tale of a young man who entered a mountain area, only to be chased away by an old person who survived after being abandoned there, which itself is based on the myth that during times when food was scarce, old women were abandoned deep in the mountains to reduce the number of mouths to feed. So, as you can already tell, there's a bit of a difference between the real-life story of the Turbo Granny and the manga's version of it. But it's still pretty safe to assume that the previously mentioned stories of the Turbo Granny still exist in the world of Dandadan, since we still do see her in an abandoned tunnel at the end of a mountain road, just like the stories from Mount Rocco. Plus, she still has the various kilometer-an-hour granny nicknames, and she really wouldn't have them if she wasn't really running on the roads. And thanks to the previously mentioned extras, we also know that she's 120 centimeters, or just under 4 feet tall, and weighs 5. 5 what? You should really know better than to ask about a lady's weight. It's rude, after all. But it's 5 question marks.
Let me go right now! I'll murder you all! Let me go!
After the Turbo Granny's defeat, she gets caught in a maneki-neko, or a beckoning cat. Which, if you've consumed any other media from Japan, you've probably seen this before. Heck, it's what Mario's cat power is based on. And just as the Turbo Granny said to Acro Silky, they're said to bring good luck. Specifically the white ones anyways. As different colored maneki-nekos are said to bring different things. Like the previously mentioned, white is for good luck and good fortune, while black is to ward off evil, red is for good health, yellow or gold is for wealth, and pink is for romance. But let's get back on topic, as throughout most of the series, this tracks, as the group is usually lucky to have the Turbo Granny on their side in quotation marks. Because she's always there to tell them something about a yokai, to give some relevant advice, or maybe even just to be a mentor. And stuff usually goes ass-ways up when they're separated for a while. But then again, that's just the plot, so maybe I'm just reading a bit too much into that. Now this is a video on the Turbo Granny, not the beckoning cat, but if you're interested, there's a lot of interesting stories about these cats. Who knows, Yukinobu Sensei could have even taken inspiration from some of these stories for the Turbo Granny's arc. But before we move on, check this temple out. This is the Go-Toki-ji Temple in Japan, the birthplace of the beckoning cat. And my god, there's so many of them. Now, let's take a moment to move away from her origins and focus on her character instead, because her development throughout the series and the effect it's had on the rest of the cast has been very interesting, because I believe she is a perfect representation of one of the main themes of Dandadan, bound family, where she oddly parallels Okarun's development, as they both start the series being relatively lonely characters who were forced into awkward situations that they were powerless to do anything about. Okarun getting cursed and the Turbogrenin getting stuck in the maneki-neko. And while the situation for both of them was dire, they managed to bond with the people around them because of it. And I'm going to stop there now to avoid going into manga spoilers, because I know some of you are still watching the anime, but please, after it's finished, go read the manga. It's so good. And I know after saying all this, there's still going to be a lot of people who think she's just some villain simply waiting to get her powers back. But this is something that is contradicted time and time again in the series. She constantly risks her own existence to help out the cast, when she doesn't have that much of a reason to. And on the topic of the Turbogrenin being a villain, I want to address some of the criticism that many people bring up when discussing the character of the Turbogrenin. So, as many people have already pointed out, in episode 4 or chapter 18 of the manga, after the Turbogrenin's defeat and we get to see her backstory about her caring for souls of young girls who died tragic deaths, explains why she helped Momo in episode 1. She would have heard Momo getting attacked through the phone, and trying to prevent any more young girls from dying tragic deaths, she used Okarun's body to attack the Seraporians. You know, painting her in a pretty good light. You know, you could even say she's kind of a good guy. But if that's the case, then why does she try to do the exact same thing as the Seraporians to Momo in the next episode? Or at the end of it. Start of the third? You get it. And that is a very good point. But there is an explanation for it. Yokai like the Turbogrenin are extremely powerful because they embody pure raw emotion. You can see this in her fight against the Seraporians. The way she violently and brutally attacked them because she viewed them as a threat to Momo, a young girl. But what do you think is going to happen when that young girl is able to suppress her power and is able to trap her inside the body she's possessed? She's going to view Momo as a threat. And if you're an emotional, violent force of nature, what are you going to do when you get free from that? You're going to make sure that it never happens to you again. Obviously, I'm not trying to say that she's, a good guy, just a bit morally gray. And I know some of what I've discussed is just me overanalyzing a bit too much, but I love the evolution of her character and the relationships she builds throughout the series. Now, let's take a moment to appreciate the actresses behind the character. In the original Japanese dub, the Turbogrenin is voiced by Mayumi Tanaka, who you'll probably recognize if you're a big shonen fan, as she voices two extremely iconic characters, being Krillin from Dragon Ball, and of course the future king of the pirates, Monkey D. Luffy, which is oddly fitting since neither of them can swim, and of course many more iconic characters. While in the English dub, she's voiced by Barbara Goodson, who you've probably heard here or there in some smaller roles, but you probably recognize her best as either Granny Chiyo from Naruto, Laharl from the Disgaea franchise, or as the voice behind Empress Rita Repulsa from the original Power Rangers. And both actresses do a fantastic job in the role. By the way, this is your PSA to go watch the Dandadan dub. It is surprisingly good, like one of the best dubs we've gotten the last few years. It is simply amazing.
Yo, I'm bummed AF.
Why are you talking like that? Stop it.
Yeah, sorry. I'm an awkward guy, yo.
Now, if you're a gamer, you probably recognize the Turbogrenin from the Shin Megami Tensei franchise, where she makes 4 playable appearances as an early game demon. She appeared most recently in Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance, where she lived up to her name with a pretty high agility stat for the point of the game you can recruit her, where she has her own special quest that involves you stopping her from running around in the overworld before you beat the crap out of her. But if you're an anime fan, you're probably more familiar with the version of her that appears in Mob Psycho 100, called the Dash Granny. Now, for those who haven't watched it, I say version because she's kind of just an old woman and not actually a yokai. But I guess that's close enough. Now, aside from all that, the most relevance that Turbogrenin has had outside of manga, anime, and video games is, oddly enough, a commercial from 2017 starring a popular comedian from the Kansai region of Japan, Mitsukuni Daisho. Now, I did show some of this commercial earlier on in the video, but if you want to watch the whole thing, I'll link it down in the description and you can check it out yourself. It's a found footage style movie that's apparently a commercial for some walk-in food program. So definitely not the kind of bang I wanted to finish this video on. Now, of course, the Turbogrenin isn't the only yokai we see in Dandadan. There are plenty of yokai and aliens that are based on real-life urban legends and sightings. So if you'd like to see more videos comparing the real-life legends to the Dandadan counterparts, feel free to support down below by hitting that subscribe button or maybe even leaving a like if you liked it, And if I did miss something or I did make a mistake, drop it down in the comment section and I will pin it. Now, next up is Dandadan's depressingly beautiful, brutal ballerina herself, Acro Silky. So, I'll see you when I see you. Also, what did she do to Okrun's glasses? They're unbreakable.